Do you want answers?
Yeah.
I want the truth. Can you handle the truth? Does anyone know what movie that is from? What Hollywood movie?
A Few Good Men.
Yeah.
Tom Cruise.
That's right, Tom. Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson are the starring actors. That actual dialogue comes from a courthouse scene near the end of the movie, whereby Jack Nicholson, who is playing a US colonel in the US Army, he's on charges for murder. And after extensive investigation by the attorney, who is played by Tom Cruise, Jack Nicholson actually admits to the murders of 2 Marines. However, he justifies the murder, and in his own mind he thinks it's correct. He justifies it by saying that it is in the interest of national security, it is okay. This was a very entertaining movie, one of my favourites. However, that message, I think the relevance of it at the time, was 20 years old, the movie, was probably not so relevant, I think. But today, it is a lot more relevant. My speech today is about governments. It's about what governments do to maintain power, what governments do to retain control of people. My speech today is about conspiracies. It's about lies. Probably everybody in the room knows of a conspiracy theory or more. There's boundless ones that you can find. One of my favourites is the one which says that the Americans never actually landed on the moon. Instead, it was fabricated just so they could gain the psychological advantage of winning the space race with the Soviet Union. I think that's probably a little bit fanciful, and I don't particularly believe that conspiracy theory, as cynical as I am. A few months ago, I watched a documentary on the September 11th terrorist attacks. And what was depicted there was quite insightful, it was quite graphic, it was quite disturbing, to be frank. Basically, the stories, I'm sure you may have all heard of this theory, but basically what the story was, there was no accusations, of course, because there's no hard proof, but basically the story was that the Americans themselves instigated this attack. There was no Osama bin Laden involvement, there was no Muslim extremists, terrorist involvement, it was the American government themselves. And the reason being, supposedly, was so they could have a reason to start this war on terror. Now, this theory is not one that is made just by some left-wing fanatical group that maybe has an axe to grind with the American government. This documentary was put together by a group of people who have no vested interest at all in the American government or the American system. And they spent a lot of money on this. And the evidence and the investigations and the scientific research that went into this documentary uncovered a lot of evidence which is very hard to refute. But again, you can never prove something like this, so again, it's only a conspiracy. Now, there are a lot of other, for the last 5 years, I think 10 years ago, I would never have been interested in conspiracy theories. And it's only in the last few years that I think I saw one or read about one, and then I got an interest in it. And there's so many other conspiracy theories out there in the world. A lot of them are quite believable, others are not so much. And they're not all about the Americans, they're not all about governments. It's right across the board, all different countries and different groups. But what they all do, in my mind, is even if only 1% of what the conspiracy theories out there say are true, then it paints a really ugly picture of the world that we live in. Why is this coming to light now? It's not because conspiracies are new. It's because of the times that we live in. When I say the times, I mean the drastic situation that the Earth, that we find ourselves in on the planet at the moment. The recession of 2007 is still continuing. There are many internal conflicts throughout the world. The quality of life of man in general, especially the Western world, in comparative terms, is as probably one of its lowest. And when man's livelihood is taken away from him, man acts. And the first part of that action is he asks questions. Where are you spending the money? Why are you spending the money? Why are we fighting wars, and why are we fighting other people's wars when we have enough problems of our own? Why is there such a large inequality gap between the richest and the poorest? Questions like this are asked. And the answers are not always forthcoming, of course. However, this starts a process, and that process over time dredges up information, stuff that's maybe hidden below the surface. And that's how these conspiracies start. And that's how they get legs, and that's how they turn into truths over time in some people's minds. But what does all this mean? It can mean a lot, or it can mean not much at all. It really depends on how, I've lost the word. Depends on how much you want to believe, or not believe. And as you can tell, I'm a cynic, and I'm starting to believe this. I never used to be, but I am today. I think it's something that you get as you grow older. In any case, no matter if you believe or not, there's not much we can do about it. I think that this is a price, what is happening in the world, if it's really happening or it's just people's imaginations. I think this is the price that we pay for living on this planet at this time, in this technologically advanced planet with 7-8 billion people, with cross cultures and competing interests. I think this is just a permutation of all those factors together, and we just have to learn to live with it. My interest is not born from being directly involved or directly affected. My interest is basically stems from man's innate desire to know the truth. And it's a little bit more than that, actually. I remember growing up, and I remember when I was in my teens, maybe as I was starting to devour the news on the channels and starting to learn a lot from school, etc. I remember watching the television and seeing we always had a big international news part in Australia. We didn't have much news of our own, and we used to like the news of the planet. And there was famines in Africa, there was genocides in Serbia, there was wars in other places. There was propaganda coming out of the communist bloc. And I used to think how lucky we were. How lucky we lived in a country whereby there was no crap like that. Where we could trust the politicians, we could trust the government, and there was no second guessing. You would trust them like you trusted your brother and sister. And it was like the poor people that live in those countries, and we're so lucky. But today I'm not so sure. And that makes me sad. Everybody deserves to know the truth.